The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it. Great to be with you on a Tuesday. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Plenty more to get into with spring football. Some different voices, specifically a voice from the offensive line we'll get to here in a little bit. Can join us today on Hail Varsity, wherever you find us across the Hail Varsity Radio Network. 489-1240, 489-1240. Toll free, 800-825-5865. Can watch the show if that's your thing. The Hail Varsity YouTube channel, subscribe to that. Some great highlights and press conference video, as well as always on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. The Hail Varsity Radio Twitter handle is something you can follow and get updates and takes as well at HVarsity Radio, KFOR Sports, Facebook, and Twitter as well. Numbers to get in, you have that. Can email the show, Chris at hailvarsity.com. And find us individually on Twitter at Schmidt_radio, at Herbalessence for Elijah. So I got to ask you, Elijah, you sent me a response on Twitter. Love you all. Thanks so much for coming out to Columbus yesterday. We had a fun road show. We had a successful baseball game last night. I am still de-thawing, but I just need to man up and toughen up. That is me. But you thought I was joking about the size of this giant bunny my wife purchased. Hopefully, I left the dogs out at home. I hope they take that thing down. There's no arms on this bunny. My wife's weird. So we'll see if it lasts. But you thought I was kidding. I sent you a still pic of that thing on Twitter last night, and I said it was free to a good home. You sent me some sort of DEFCON 2 image of a house on fire. What did you walk into last night? I was whining about a late night.
Oh, no, I wasn't whining about anything. You just said it's free to a good home, so I had to make sure you knew that my home was not good right now.
Yeah, so you were just saying it ain't coming here. So
my car's not doing so great, though. I've got a new headlamp on the way from Amazon as we speak right now. I rear-ended a lady last Friday afternoon. So,
oh, no.
Yeah, that was my bad. If you go look outside at my car, the whole...
How's the lady?
Oh, she's fine.
Okay.
She's fine, and she only had a couple $100 repairs of her car, which I am paying out of pocket. If my insurance company is listening, no, you aren't.
Okay, so you just said, hey, can I take care of this?
Yeah, it was very minor. It was like 10 miles an hour in a neighborhood, and the worst damage was my headlamp literally exploded on the front end of my car. But luckily, only $100 on Amazon to fix that. So all in all, the car is worse than the home, and the car's not very bad at all. So that's what I'm doing.
So the bunny is not. We should hold that thing for ransom from her. See if she'll pony up.
Blindfold it, hold a knife to it.
That's extreme. Are you all right, man?
We just had to send it to Brady Oltman's, and he could put it on video in his right. What do you call it? His interview chamber.
Yeah, chamber is the best way. It's the best way to put it. Brennan chimes in. Spring football's cool and all, but I'm at the state pool tournament. He's headed that way, a real sport. Well, I love pool. I grew up with a pool table. Sadly, it did not enhance or develop my skills. I just lost round after round and dollar after dollar to Grandpa. There were some great meltdowns by my little brother, though, when he would lose. He was not what you call a good loser, which takes me to Nebraska football and some of the commentary that we didn't get to yesterday. But here's my shocking and very profound takeaway from yesterday. We know what Rhule sounds like. We know what his assistants sound like. And that's pretty genuine, pretty transparent, pretty direct. And there is some coach speak mixed in. But overall, you can absolutely translate from a high level of sincerity what he thinks and where he wants to go. The plan is there. He has it. and that's the direction they're going to go, and there's confidence with that plan. That's super important because as he goes, the rest of the team will go, and it's that way in college football. More times than not, it's the coach and the staff that are going to lead until you get a team that is old enough to take the reins. And sometimes you just don't have those teams, despite having 3 or 4 years of experience, maybe a couple of years of starting experience. It is still a delicate situation when you transfer ownership, when you say it's all on you. And there's been moments, and you know them as a Nebraska fan, who the guys are, who the actors are, and who the players were that were at a different level, at an elite level, that wouldn't let the team lose or had the unit rallied. And that is the Peters and Wistroms, that's the Tommy Fraziers, that's the Pipeline, that's those core of individuals. And you've got a lot of guys. You've got one guy per level on a defense. You got multiple guys on one level in those great years where the transfer of leadership is from the coaching staff to the players, where it's player-led. You hope by the time a really good recruiting class matures and then goes out and balls out and wins, that they can recycle it. They're paying it forward to the next group of guys that are behind them. And you see that happen when you have teams that are uber talented and like-minded and have a certain mentality. You'll see about a 7-year run for teams. USC, Pete Carroll, and those teams that had some things vacated, of course, but they were great. You had a 7-year run with Mack Brown in Texas, Colt McCoy following Vince Young. You see what Nebraska had going from 93 through 01. I mean, that, again, it's really a couple of classes where it gets paid forward and you have exceptional talent, really good depth, but above all, that leadership transfers.
Wow, that 7-year window you just brought up, I look back through so many college football teams and I go, yeah, 7
It's two classes, and rarely do you get a third. There's a third cycle or a 12-year run can happen.
But that's Bama.
That's it. That is it. And they've even dipped. I mean, they've only, dare I whisper this, won one championship in the last 5 years. Look at Clemson's 7-year spurt.
I was going to say, it feels like we're at about year 7, maybe now going into 8 of Ohio State's run from Urban into Ryan Day.
And what's happened? They're still damn good. They're still 11-2. But now it's Rose Bowls instead of college football playoffs. There's a gradual dip. How bad's the dip? Is it Holiday Bowl versus Orange Bowl? Is it Rose Bowl versus college football playoff? Or is it no bowl or Music City Bowl 5 or 6 years ago? So I want to get into the mentality of this team and just not what's being said, but how it's being said. Elijah, am I crazy here, or does it sound like there's some joy, there's some relief with the upperclassmen here and how they're going about their business? I think they're excited to be coached by these guys. That's not a shot at the previous staff. I think they were ready for something new and different. They're going to embrace it. I don't know that the skepticism's at a high level yet. I mean, you haven't kicked off yet. Everyone's unbeaten in the offseason. But I think there's just some joy because there's a pretty high level of no nonsense with Rhule and his plan. I think the buy-in, you hear, we got a lot of buy-in. Well, the weeding out process has been effective from winter conditioning to now, and guys are ready to go to work.
And the main thread in terms of what Matt Rhule, it feels like early in this process, is trying to build is less. I mean, you think back to the Frost era, and I don't want to keep on going back, but it's important to note the difference where it felt like that staff was all about, you know what, we want a player-led team. We're all about finding leaders, and we're all about building a culture, but you never quite knew what building that culture entailed besides, well, we need toughness. And then you look at Matt Rhule, and I feel like you ask the average Husker fan could tell you this is a culture he is trying to build on competitiveness. And when you look back through the great Husker teams and the great Husker players, you look at the Peter brothers, look at Tommy Frazier, look at Amon Green, you look at all these guys, the defining thread through those guys is they were ultra competitors. They rose through adversity, and they always wanted to win at the end of the day. You look at Matt Rhule, from the jersey colors through winter conditioning through the mat drills, saying, you know what, this is where you are on the team right now, and this is how you get better. And then you look at the story coming out this week, which is the fact that there's no single-digit players on the roster right now. Everyone who's a single digit had to move up and become a double digit player in terms of their jersey number, and you have to go earn that right to be a single digit player. Everything within this Matt Rhule program, even those groups that you had during winter conditioning, was all about competitiveness. That's what Matt Rhule is trying to build with his culture. You can see it from the outside. He wants to build a group of ultra competitors. That starts in recruiting, but right now he's trying to do it through winter conditioning and spring football by saying, you know what, everything is going to be a competition at this point in the year.
489-1240 can chime in if you're jibing with this conversation. We'll get to some phone calls and emails in a minute, but the mind and the mindset absolutely matters, and the Rhule mindset and mentality is exactly what Elijah touched on. It's competitiveness, and we'll get to Ethan Piper here in a little bit, and the comment that stuck out to me was more so about, well, we're kind of done being babied. Let's hear from Piper. Let me pull up that cut here specifically, and you have cut 16. This is what I'm talking about here when I hear Ethan Piper was just so excited to play football again, and he's excited to play football again under Coach Raiola, but he wants to go. He's sick of hearing about how close, 4-8, 5-7, 3-9. Doesn't cut it with him. I mean, he wants to go take it into his hands and the rest of the offensive hands and be better. Not just, oh, shoot, we're close. No, you are what you are at 3-9, 4-8, 5-7. It's not acceptable. Let's go win. Let's be competitive. He's one of those uber competitive guys, and he's had his ups and downs from starter to reserve to now working at the three interior spots. Here is what Ethan Piper had to say yesterday when it comes to translating that competitive spirit onto the field for Saturdays.
No, I felt that today. You can't just like build it there and not translate it. Like, there's no point of like, why do we have winter conditioning in the first place? That's us as players. Coaches have put us in a spot that we've had the tools, we have the resources, we have the people around us. But now it's up to us players to translate to the field. And I think we have enough guys that are going to do that. And I'm excited just to, like I said, it's just cut loose. Like, I think Nebraska had a stigma of, you know, we went 3-9, like 4-8, and it's like, oh, like we're close. Like, I don't know. I just feel like the whole thing has been kind of like we've been kind of babied or whatever. I'm just ready to rock and roll and see what we're made of.
Done talking, wants to start doing.
And from what I see from Ethan Piper, that looks like a guy who has made a significant body transformation, not even from whenever he started on campus, but from last year. I remember back the COVID year, I was still at UNL.
We sat down with him 3 times, and he was a guard. He was a Big Ten guard, but now he's a chiseled Big Ten guard.
Yes, that's the difference. As I remember, there was always, walking back to my car following class, there was always one time where Ethan Piper walked directly past me down on campus.
Did he push you down?
No, he didn't, but I always saw him in person, and I always was like, man, that doesn't quite look like a Big Ten offensive lineman. Something about his build just was not quite right to me. And I look at him now, and I'm not saying this just happened during winter conditioning. This is probably a long process.
This is offensive line to offensive line judgment, just for the people.
Yes, 100%. But now I look at him, the problem was he was kind of built, and this is going to sound funny, but like an upside-down piece of pizza with the crust on top. He was very broad up top, but then he was a little skinny down at the bottom. You know what I'm talking about? Like the triangle cut?
I get it. I just love you food guys, you offensive linemen going with pizza.
But that's kind of, and now he's built more like a square-cut Valentino's piece of pizza where he's kind of sturdy top to bottom.
The middle.
Yes, exactly.
Versus the
exactly,
edge.
And that's a terrible analogy for a build of a body, but that's like the number one way I see it. He has made a body transformation. I'm excited to see what he can be because he's saying the right things.
Who's with us?
We got Chris on the line before we go to
Chris, thanks for calling. Go ahead, dude.
Hey, guys, great show. Oh, the body transformation stuff, we heard all about that 5 years ago, too, so I'm kind of, we'll see if that's actually the case, because that's all the rage of 5 years ago was how bodies were transformed. But it's good to see people being kicked off the team and discipline is as harsh as that can be. Now this is normal for serious coaches taking over a program, especially the first year. And these aren't his guys, so he doesn't have any connection to them. It'll just hopefully in 2 or 3 years he still has the same discipline, so that guys that are messing around like these guys are getting kicked off the team. Because so much of the time what happens is once their guys get in, then the culture starts going south again.
I don't think there's.
So I mean, we've seen that happen here.
Let me jump in. Let me
stuff like that.
Let me jump in, please. We can have a conversation on the phone. I can talk. You can talk. It's all good. I haven't heard of anyone being kicked off. There's been suspensions. There's guys who've left on their own. So let's get that on the bullet point first and foremost. Second of all, we've heard all great things the last 5 different coaches. You're right, Chris. Is it going to be different this time with Rhule? And I think it could be because, I mean, this guy's absolutely the epitome of hands-on. There's a difference.
Well, the other coaches have had ideas for their culture. Matt Rhule has a specific plan that makes sense for building a culture.
We'll see. Chris, appreciate you listening, man. Thanks for calling in. Mitch Sherman's on the way with Hail Varsity.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
More comments from Ethan Piper in about 20 minutes or so. We welcome in Mitch Sherman with The Athletic, at Mitch Sherman on Twitter. Mitch, are you breaking the parka out for Creighton, Nebraska tonight?
Nope. It's not baseball weather, but it was last night. I got on the diamond for the first time this spring and had a good 90-minute practice. I was excited about that, and now we're back in the tomb of winter today, it seems.
We froze last night up in Columbus with our first baseball game, but it was well worth it. Got the win
nice
for the reserve.
Nice in Gretna.
Yeah, it was really nice in Gretna. It was not nice in Columbus. It was 20-mile-per-hour winds and 37, but I'm going to whine to somebody else, not you. Let's talk some spring football. Mitch, the vibe, my friend, it just from yesterday, it just sounds like guys, when you listen to some of the players, are pretty positive about their experience so far. What did you glean?
Yeah, just that. And that was definitely from the players. That was the biggest thing that was a continuous theme through what Luke Reimer and Ethan Piper, Gabe Irvin, and Heinrich Harburg had to say. Harburg was interesting because of his openness to, on day one, to be ready to switch positions. I thought back when he was talking and when some of the guys were talking to day one of spring last year, when we basically got the pronouncement that Casey Thompson would be the starting quarterback, and there was nothing like that, where it's a different state of mind around Nebraska football. The transfer was not named the starter on day one when we were still 6 months away from the season. So I think that speaks somewhat to the difference in what the environment is around Nebraska football. And we've been living in a time, before these last 4 months where everything was so urgent, and I think it was somewhat unhealthy in 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and now you can take the foot off the gas a little bit and grow this program in a way that it's supposed to be grown, in a way that's healthy. And that's not a knock on the old staff, because the guys who showed up last year, they didn't create that situation, but they were thrown into it and they had to deal with it. And, you wonder, was there anything that could have happened last year that could have made it work, considering the situation that we were in when spring began? So, this isn't about last year, it's about this year. And it was all optimistic, and that's what you'd expect from Matt Rhule, because that's been his tone and the way that he's run things since he showed up and started to implement his system. So I think yesterday was was just another step in that direction. I didn't hear anything from him that was necessarily a surprise. I liked his openness and transparency about players and positions and personnel moves, but I expected that he would be that way.
Mitch Sherman's with us here from The Athletic. It's Hail Varsity Radio. And Mitch, you brought up something interesting, at least relating back to what Schmidt and I were talking about back in segment 1. That was Casey Thompson essentially being proclaimed the starter on day 1 of spring ball of last year, and nothing of the sort this year. And I kind of read into that as Matt Rhule's emphasis on competitiveness. I mean, they're making them compete for everything this winter and spring down with the Husker football program. And I want to get your take. Does what you've seen, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, but what you've seen over the past couple of years indicate to you that we were watching a football team that lacked competitiveness?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were other priorities. They wanted to be competitive and at positions where they had players that could foster a competitive environment. I think there was competition. I don't know that was the problem that brought down the last regime, was a lack of competitiveness, but you know, as I said a minute ago, I think the whole environment was somewhat unhealthy, and it predates spring a year ago. But the way that spring opened last year was something of a red flag, because I think they felt the need from day one to get going and be ahead of the curve. That they were far enough behind where they needed to be that they had to try to make up for lost ground. And if that meant cutting some corners and naming a starter before a practice in the spring, or when only one practice in the spring had taken place, then that's the route that they chose to take, because they felt they needed to go that way. Sometimes, yeah, that was at the expense of having a competitive environment, and I don't know that it would have been any different last year. In fact, I would say it wouldn't have been any different last year at the quarterback spot if they waited until July or August to determine that Casey Thompson was going to be the starter. That's just a symptom, I think, of the overall feeling that existed in the program, the way that the spring began last year in comparison to this year, when it feels much more, you know, I said it was unhealthy last year, so I'll just say it feels much healthier this year. And you know, it's what you'd expect with the start of a new regime. It's not, you know, like Matt Rhule and his staff are doing anything revolutionary by being 3 months in and at the cusp of spring practice for the first time and things feel healthy. That's pretty normal for this stage of development with a new coach and an entirely new staff.
Mitch, one of the things that was outlined by Coach Rhule yesterday was what he wants in the fourth quarter. He wants a strong run game. He wants 75 yards in that fourth quarter, rushing the football, the final 15. Those are some benchmarks. That's music to a lot of Nebraska football fans of yesteryear or any year that just want to see different results in the fourth quarter. And to get to that destination, it's going to be a big learning process this spring with the pieces you have on the offensive line that can go, so you can evaluate, and then also spend a minute on the running back room. That cohesion between an offensive line that can gel with some starters or projected starters and some missing starters, and then the running back options they have. Do you like Nebraska being able to hit those benchmarks as a reality next season, be a good fourth quarter running football team?
Yeah, Rhule wants to be in a position where they can set that target of 75 yards rushing in the fourth quarter when they get to the final 15 minutes of games. Now, if they're behind by 21 points or 14 points or 10 points when you get to the end of the third, then you have to throw it in the fourth quarter. But he outlined a stat yesterday about the number of games that Nebraska led going into the fourth quarter and ended up losing. And so specifically in reference to those games is where that 75 yards rushing comes in. And that's interesting. And if you add that up, and that's 300 yards in a game. If you can go 75 yards a quarter and run for 300 yards a game, well, you're going to win a lot of games. So I think he wants to run the ball effectively, not just in the fourth quarter, but it becomes even more important in the fourth when you have to work the clock or want to work the clock, because you're nursing a lead, and it's the Big Ten, and if it's a lead, it's probably going to be a one-score game or a two-score game. So that's something that would have benefited Nebraska a lot over the last couple of years, to be able to run it for 75 yards in the fourth quarter, and that requires a stable offensive line that isn't just a bunch of guys who can go out there and block and move defensive linemen, but also guys who can hold up after playing 45 minutes of football, to be able to go out there and do it effectively in the final 15. So that comes down to off-season training, gains in strength and conditioning, depth on the offensive line. They're going to continue to work in that direction. I mean, they're far from a finished product up front right now, but the addition of Ben Scott as center, the return of Nuri Nuili at one of the guard spots, probably left guard, those are steps in the right direction. You got to get Teddy Prohaska back. He's out this spring, but is seemingly on track to return for his third season in Lincoln. He hasn't been healthy. He's a guy like Thomas Fedoni at tight end who has been hurt both years that he's been in the program. So that's no sure thing, but if he's there, then your offensive line is better, and you've got to develop depth and figure out who's going to play guard and who's going to play tackle. And eventually you can answer a bunch of those questions, and you've got a good offensive line. At running back, it looks like a pretty solid room. Right now Anthony Grant is out, and he ran for 900 yards last year, so you can't discount him from the picture. But whether they can rely on him or not, and right now they can't rely on him, but maybe they can by August. Even if they can't, it sounds like Matt Rhule really likes what he has with Gabe Ervin as a battering ram, as Rhule said yesterday. A.J. Allen, Ramir Johnson, Emmett Johnson behind him. Now, you hope you get Grant, because he can do a lot of those things. He's maybe the most complete back in the entire room in being able to pound a defensive line and, have some breakaway speed. But, he's working through some things right now, so I think we'll probably learn more as the spring goes on what his availability is going to be going forward.
Mitch, does that Anthony Grant story sound to you like a major story or a minor story in the grander scheme of Matt Rhule in this rebuild in spring football?
Well, I don't think it's a huge thing right now. Rhule made it sound like he can work his way back into a good situation. I think it's a culture thing where he's not going to make exceptions because a guy ran for 900 yards last year. He's not going to get treated differently than others, and if he doesn't uphold the standards that they expect on the field or in the classroom or wherever it is, then he's going to have to face the consequences. So that's the way you want to start things. I think there have been examples throughout recent history in Nebraska football where players have been treated differently because of who they were, and they've gotten more chances. And while that may help you in the moment, it doesn't help you in the long run. And so to treat Anthony Grant like everybody else is the right way for, obviously he knows better than me, but in my opinion, it's the right way for Matt Rhule to go about this. And I think it's also not as damaging to the program to be without him right now because of the depth that you do have in that running back room. There's some good options there, but of course it would be a stronger, deeper, better core if you get him back.
Mitch, about 20 seconds. What's coming up from you and The Athletic?
Big dive back into Dylan Raiola tomorrow in the recruiting weekend that the Huskers have on tap here. It's just huge as far as the significance and the historical perspective implications that there are with bringing in a couple of 5-star guys and more than a dozen 4-stars. But I went back to my reporting with Raiola in Arizona from February and had a bunch of material that was saved that didn't get in that initial story, and it's all coming out tomorrow on The Athletic. Everything that's left over about Dylan Raiola and what might sway him in the decision that he has upcoming as he gets ready to come back to Nebraska for an unofficial visit this weekend.
Good stuff. Can't wait to read. Mitch, you take care and stay warm out on that diamond, all right? Thanks for a few minutes.
Okay, thanks. Same to you, Chris.
All right. Good stuff from Mitch Sherman on Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Big thanks to Mitch Sherman. As excited to hear more on Raiola this weekend. Stone Saunders is in Nebraska today. Pick up on Twitter with Coach Rhule. big-time talented quarterback from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for 2025 that is here. Numbers to get in, 489-1240. You can email Chris at hailvarsity.com is where you can also email. And when we talk about March 25th and this star-studded weekend, it's going to be big time, of course, headlined by Dylan Raiola. You have Brandon Baker is out of Santa Ana, California. He's an offensive lineman. Nathaniel. I know a lot of Nates. Many go by Nate, not Nathaniel, but guess what? He's a talented running back that's trying to decide between SC, Oregon, Washington, and Nebraska. Gatlin Bayer is also another talent. He is a wide receiver, a 4-star. I believe he's out of Burley, Idaho. That's beautiful country, I hear.
Idaho's beautiful. I have, I should say, my brother has some friends. I guess they're acquaintances of mine that live out there, and it's beautiful country. Burley?
I think so. Grant Bricks. You have Peyton Lewis, Gage Ginther, our old buddy Gage.
I like Gage.
Gage has been offered by Oklahoma recently. He's out of Fort Collins. The Buffs, the Rams of Colorado State and Nebraska, the top 4 there. You have Riley Sunram, beg your pardon. I'll learn how to read here. He's, anytime you got a peer recruiting list in Nebraska, and then you have North Dakota State, Minnesota, and K-State, those 3 other schools do really good work with offensive line, right? And Riley's an offensive lineman that'll be in. You're going to have a complete list by Brady Oltmans here. William Nawari, Nigel Smith, Carter Nelson, of course, from Ainsworth. Jacob Smith is getting looked at by Bama. He's a defensive end. He's out of Connecticut, Notre Dame also. Davon Hall, from Bell West. Isaiah Mosey, Bangowski is a linebacker out of Kansas. He's out of Junction City. Caleb Benning, incredible talent, defensive back. Of course, with Westside, Proud Papa. Of course, you hear morning 7 to 10 with Coffee and Cream. Iowa State, Iowa, K-State, Nebraska in search of Caleb Benning. You have Ryan Wingo, the wideout. Pelham, Sprague, Smith, Jared Smith. He's a defensive lineman that Bama likes as well. He's out of Connecticut. A lot of East Coast guys. And Nebraska is going to try and get that pipeline for sure. Back up and running from Jersey as well as Texas. You have Mario Buford. He's out of Texas. Ian Flint, he's a tight end. And Flint is out of Katy, Texas. Thomas Heisberger, he's a linebacker. And Isaiah McMorris, of course, Bellevue West, standout ball player at wide receiver. So that's just some of the updated visitors coming in for 2025, headlined by Raiola.
Yeah, obviously Raiola is the crown jewel here because when you look at that list of guys, and this is not anything to say, well, Matt Rhule and Nebraska couldn't get them here in the first place, but why they're all here this weekend is because they want to be here the same weekend as Dylan Raiola. Dylan Raiola is the crown jewel. We've talked about it ad nauseum on this show, but that factor in just being able to put together a recruiting weekend like this is huge, and I don't disagree whenever you see people online and on other shows saying this is the most important recruiting weekend that Nebraska's had in my lifetime. And I don't think that's crazy to say. That I can't remember in my lifetime a big recruiting weekend just in terms of the profile of player that Nebraska has and how many of them are in town this weekend. It's huge.
Oh, I mean, it's not going to get...
I mean, if this weekend goes well...
Much bigger.
If this weekend goes well, potential to be program changing.
Sure. Well, it can be. You get that difference maker at quarterback. You get some guys that are at an elite skill level at a starting point that come in and then can get groomed and trained and have back to the mentality theme we started the show with. It can work really well. Then you look at some of the recruiting classes from 1990 on through 92, 93, and you just go, wow. Not just because of the number of hits. Hits meaning, yeah, they played a couple of years, these were first-round hits. These were second-round hits. These were third-round hits that played multiple years. And then the following recruiting class had much of the same. And then you just stockpile, and then hopefully you get a 7-year window, and a 7-year run. And
when you look at how important it is, like within that 7-year run, all those teams that make those kind of runs, and even just teams that are consistently in the top 15, the consistent thread that those teams all have is multiple first-round guys on their roster playing significant snaps. And whenever I look at Nebraska's roster right now, I think I've made this point before on the show, I think you see maybe one potential first-round guy in Eric Gilbert. I mean, among the returners that we know of, this kind of excludes the incoming freshman, but I think of one in Eric Gilbert in terms of a guy that has that potential to be a first-round draft pick someday. Maybe Prohaska, if he's able to curb the injuries.
You've got some NFL guys on the roster. What level of NFL guys do they become?
Are they first-round guys? For the most part, with the current roster, I would argue no. There's very, very few potential first-round guys on this roster. And when you look at this recruiting weekend, in terms of the recruiting acumen, where these guys are ranked, what I've seen on film from some of these guys, I think you have multiple potential first-round picks that are going to be on campus this weekend. I think that's how huge this weekend is in terms of if you have a 25% hit rate this weekend and you get the guys that you want, you could end up with 3 potential first-round picks on your roster just in terms of what type of athleticism that they have. Now, development is a whole thing that I am not factoring in here. Being able to keep their heads screwed on straight and being here for 4 years, not entering the transfer portal, there's a whole bunch of factors that can derail a potential first-round pick.
There's new hurdles.
But with all that being said, in terms of what type of potential these guys have that Nebraska's going to have on roster, you have potentially multiple future first-round picks coming to campus on I guess it'd be Friday night.
They've got a shot.
They've got a shot. And how is Nebraska going to be able to pitch these guys? And what's the peer recruiting going to look like? Those are all questions that remain to be seen. And I think we're going to get some of those questions answered this weekend. But what can Nebraska put together with this list of visitors? Because I don't think you can understate how huge it is, or overstate, how huge it is.
Well, and you have a unique moment here with Nebraska football, similar to back in 1992 with Tommy Frazier. And Nebraska football was going 9-3. They were 15th in the country. They'd probably win a Big 8 or tie for a Big 8, and they were able to distance themselves from Colorado. Oklahoma had faded back, but where were you on the national scene? And Frazier was a game changer, and it was the right guy at the right time to kind of coincide with what you were shifting to defensively with that 4-3 that we've talked the last 3 weeks with Coach McBride on Mondays. But you have, we talk a lot about energy, and we talk about the Rhule credibility, at least what he's done successfully at previous stops. There's the track record, and that's a good point made by Scott in our stream about the Rhule factor, so to speak. And you have a chance to infuse that talent along with the energy and then become relevant again. Beyond the storied red end, you can be a good football team in the Big Ten and beyond with the right guy playing quarterback. We'll wind down hour one at Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
We'll talk some hoops. Andy Markowski coming up. We'll stay on the topic of recruiting and getting that game changer, potentially for Nebraska football with Raiola. Showcase for a ton of talent on the 25th this weekend here for Nebraska football. But what it's meant to Nebraska when they've had the right team and the right NBA guys on the hardwood. So we'll spend time with Andy Markowski, get his take on the WNIT coming up as well this week at PBA. That's next hour. And we'll also look at kind of that signature ball game for the upcoming schedule, ESPN.com. They have their preseason top 25 list out, season-defining game. Or there could be a couple. And as we look at Nebraska's schedule, it's still spring ball. We still don't know who's playing offensive line or starting at quarterback or how the 3-3. A lot of work to do. I get it. Cart before the horse. But it's fun to look and peek at Nebraska's schedule and look at All right. What could be super impactful? Right now, a lot of the guys have a ton of confidence under this new regime, and Ethan Piper very confident that he's got his offensive line coach back and the way they're going. Want to remind you about your friends at Dyer Law, and workers' compensation is a topic that's not real easy to discuss and probably even harder to get simplified and results, and it's just a bad situation for a lot of folks. Dyer Law is there for you to get rid of that confusion about your options for your workers' compensation claim. Put your trust in the team at Dyer Law to help ensure that your rights are protected and you get the settlement you deserve. Call Dyer Law and the team today at 402-394-7529 for Dyer Law, or visit dyer.law to chat with a trusted professional about your workers' compensation claim. That's dyer.law. And 402-393-7529. Dyer.law today to discuss workers' compensation if you're in that situation. Brendan jumping in already, man, with Minnesota. When we talk about season defining, you can make a strong argument for that. Dion chimes in. Dylan also is not only bringing the entire family, but his grandparents from Hawaii to the spring game. Nobody does that from the distance for nothing.
It's so hard.
Hawaii this time of year in Nebraska?
But it's so hard to read into that whenever you also go.
It's very comparable temperature-wise.
But it's so hard to read into that, like a move like this, because you go, not only are those Dylan's grandparents, those are all also Dominic and Donovan's parents. Mm-hmm. So like they have a son who's coaching in the spring game too. Their grandkids getting recruited. He's going to be there. It's so hard to read in that and say,
they just want
they're
see
not going to do that
Donnie.
for anybody else. It's possible. It's possible. It could just be like Raiola's trip up for the basketball game where they just want to see Donnie. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's how that goes.
What game was he here for? Was that Minnesota?
It was Minnesota, the home game.
Needed him in Chicago. They needed them in Chicago.
But not only will Dylan Raiola save the football program, he also saved the basketball program.
Can you play point guard and shoot 40% from three? Just asking.
And while you're at it, how are your abilities in right field?
Well, I want to. Are you good on the mound, son? Do you have a
arm.
A noon to 3 o'clock slider? Can it break? Hour 2 coming up. Hail Varsity. We're presented by Currency.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Back with you. It's Hour 2. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency for all your equipment financing needs. Go Currency. We'll switch to the round ball here for a little bit. Get back into some football topics and thoughts. Husker Baseball v. Creighton tonight as well. And Husker women in action Thursday with the WNIT. We welcome in Andy Markowski, Husker standout, the pride of Orrin at Markowski_Andy. On Twitter's where you find him. Andy, NCAA tournament's been wild. It's been upset-filled. Let's start there, bud. And you and I both, it's all right to get the lighter out and just go to town on our bracket. We did that early and often with Arizona.
You did that Friday with Princeton, yeah?
We did.
We were literally inside Longwell's, and Schmidt pulls out the lighter and burns his bracket. It was incredible.
It was in the smoke-free but bracket destruction zone, Andy. So I was within fire code, of course. But on a serious note, man, how do you absorb the tournament? What have you loved so far?
Yeah, I mean, you never know, right? I mean, that's what makes the NCAA basketball men's tournament so much fun to follow. As much as the prognostication people in the world think they know it's just hard to predict. I mean, it's it really comes down to make or miss in a lot of situations. Teams that don't shoot it well, go home. Teams that make a buzzer beater, live to fight another day, and then that changes, brackets because matchups, I think drive a lot of the upsets or just how teams stylistically, fit or don't fit against each other. So, been a lot of fun to watch, and really the 16 teams that are left, I still think it's fairly wide open. I think Alabama, being in the East, playing in Louisville, would probably be maybe a slight favorite on paper to my eye, but it wouldn't surprise me to see any number of teams make it to the Final Four.
What about Creighton? Would you be surprised if Creighton was in the Final Four? Well, what have you liked so far about the run from the Jays, and what do they still face?
Well, I think people like their matchup, right? I mean, Baylor had really struggled all year defensively. I think they lost 4 of their last 6 before they got into the tournament, so certainly weren't playing their best basketball. Obviously Baylor is still a good team, and Creighton played a really sound game. Shot it well from the 3. I think set an NCAA record, by going 22 of 22 from the free throw line. So certainly played one of their best games, and then they caught somewhat of a break, right? I mean, not that Princeton is a bad team. I think they're good. They've got a couple matchup pieces that have been hard to defend in the tournament. They've shot it well. They're playing with a lot of confidence, but you're playing a 15 seed to have a chance to get to the Elite 8. So I think Creighton has to like that draw, and I think it potentially gets tougher for them against the Alabama team. But Miller, their best player, is hurt, playing at 70%. So things are certainly lining up for Creighton to have a chance to not only get to the Elite 8, but maybe have a chance to take down a really good team in Alabama.
Andy, a thought with the Big Ten and Purdue's debacle, and also the conference's hopes riding on Michigan State v. K-State. I know where my family's leaning, and I know where I'm leaning, so we're divided there. I'm pulling for the Wildcats. Mama and Junior are going for Sparty. But just you get 8 bids, and you got one in the Sweet 16, man.
Yeah, I don't sign up to that this is a bad performance, or historically the Big Ten doesn't do well in the tournament. I really think it's seeded for a reason, and the Big Ten historically has a lot of solid to good teams, and that's what the league has been. I mean, you look at how leagues have done for their seeding. The Big 12 has underperformed. I mean, the Big East has 3 teams in, but one's a 2, one's a 3. They're supposed to be in the Sweet 16. I mean, outside of Creighton as a 6 seed is the only Big East team that outperformed their seed line. So you certainly, the Purdue loss reflects poorly, and you can dice that up a lot of different ways. Purdue was picked to finish 6th in the preseason, right? So they had a historically really good conference season to win the league, and maybe they weren't quite on paper as good as what they needed to be. So I think the Big Ten is fine. Michigan State I thought was the one team. I think it was on last week with you guys. I thought they were the only team to my eye that could outplay their seed line. As a 7 that's in the Sweet 16. So there's been. I did the math. Since 2000, there's been 17 Big Ten teams to make a Final Four. There's been 21 ACC teams. So I don't, we just haven't had the one really good team to take home a national title, and there's only one of those in 6 conferences a year that gets to do that. So I just think the Big Ten is a really solid league that has a lot of good teams, that when you get a 7, an 8, a 9, and a 10, and 11, you're not going to get a lot of those teams into the Sweet 16. And outside of Indiana as a 4, they had a chance to get to their seed line. We only had one team predicted to be there in the end, and that was Purdue. And Michigan State is now carrying that flag. So I don't know. I get tired of the Big Ten getting beat up, because I don't think it's as bad of a league as maybe what people make it out to be. And the Big 12 has performed worse, and no one's talking about them, they had five top 3 seeds, and they only got two into the Sweet 16. So that to me, that league has performed worse than the Big Ten based on how they should have been projected to do.
Andy, before we flip gears here, talk some women's NIT quickly, I want to get your take on something that's been ruminating in my brain for probably years now. Whenever the Big Ten gets to the tournament, it's known as a very physical league, but then they have to go deal with refs from around the country, and we've bemoaned the refs from the Big Ten enough this year. I don't need to pile on them some more, but do you think there's a factor that Big Ten teams just aren't ready for how the NCAA tournament is going to get officiated?
I mean, once again, by what metric, I guess, you know? I mean, we certainly, Tennessee played a really physical game. So, there is, a chance to be physical and have referees not call fouls. So, you have to adjust a little bit on how the game is getting played. But, going back to historical data, we've had 7 teams make a Final Four since, the mid-'90s. I mean, there's not a lot of leagues that have had the amount of teams make it to a Final Four. You have North Carolina and Duke and your traditional ACC powers, and obviously Kansas carries the Big 12. So I just don't sign up that, the Big Ten's not. Yeah, certainly stylistically, they play with more bigs than but so does UConn right now. So I think it's an easy way to kind of paint the Big Ten into this picture that, what the Big Ten should do is get DePaul and a bunch of teams and have 4, win 15 league games and get a 2 and a 3 seed versus, having 14 pretty good teams and end up, having a record of 22 and 12, and now you start drawing the 7, 8, 9, 10 seeds, and you're just not going to be able to play yourself through that seed line as much as a 2 like Marquette or 3 Xavier. It's just an easier draw, and I just think the league is too deep, it's too good, and they lack maybe the 1 or 2 really, really elite teams that maybe can get to a Final Four or win a championship. But I don't think that takes away from the league being a really, really tough league. So next year you can have 3 Big Ten teams in the Final Four. I mean, I just think it's very cyclical, and Purdue was a 1 seed, and the rest of the Big Ten really were slotted in that 7 to 10 range. And how did Penn State play? You'd say they played pretty well, right? They beat a hot A&M team. How did Michigan State play? You'd say they played pretty well. You'd say Maryland, there's not one person that picked Maryland to beat West Virginia. So I think the Big Ten did a lot of good things, but the Purdue loss, I think is what everybody wants to talk about. And, certainly that was a poor showing and, reflects poorly on Purdue, but I don't think you should throw the whole conference away because they only got 1 team into the Sweet 16. They just weren't seeded to have that great of a year.
Andy Markowski's with us, Hail Varsity Radio. Andy, want to ask you about Rick Pitino and his move to St. John's. Are you surprised? Do you care? What do you think of Rick back in the Big East?
Yeah, I mean, it's, what have you done for me lately, right? World that we live in, and certainly, Rick can coach basketball. I mean, maybe one of the top, coaches of all time when it comes to winning and rebuilding programs and winning in the conference tournament. And, so all of that, he certainly is probably going to, put St. John's on the map and have a competitive basketball program. With the transfer portal, you probably do that quicker than what you could 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. So I don't emotionally, get too charged up. I mean, they certainly, morally, I would probably have an issue with, my son playing there just based on, some of the things he's done. Some of the cheating stuff that, he was accused of. Now it's legal, so we've kind of come full circle on that, on what we could get college athletes. But having him in the Garden, in the Big East, that's certainly for basketball people that is going to be a fun story to follow. But if you can win, you're going to always have another opportunity. If you can shoot or play, you're going to have an opportunity to go and play. That's just kind of how society is. And Rick is has got 7, 8, 9 chances, and certainly, I'm sure he'll screw something up at St. John's, but they're hiring him to win basketball games, and the pattern is he'll figure it out in short order.
So, fashion question: do you think he still has the white suit?
Yeah, I mean, I think he only breaks that out for big games. So, I mean, maybe a Creighton St. John's Big East Championship game that white suit will come back out.
The white Brioni. That's so funny. Andy Markowski with us. Andy, let's talk Thursday night PBA. Nebraska.
No, not PBA. It's going to be at Kansas.
Oh, shoot. Forgive me there. Okay, they played the first time at PBA, triple overtime. A thought on the matchup. I mean, the women are absolutely on fire. Great win over Northern Iowa.
Yeah, they've got 2 NIT wins. Teams that they're better than, right? I mean, physically playing against the Valley, we should have won those games at home. Kansas is good, right? They're probably a surprise that they didn't get in the tournament. I think everybody had them in, except for the selection committee. So, a good team, a team that, Nebraska had to beat in 3 overtimes. We had Hybe in that game, and we won't have Sam, and we had Widener for a half in that game. And the second half, she was not available. That was the game she got hurt in. So, our roster has changed. They're very good. Have 2 first team all Big 12 players in a 6'6" center and a guard. So, we'll have to probably play some of our best basketball to be able to go into Lawrence and win. But the team appears to have a lot of energy and fight. And I think as we talked about last week, the NIT is kind of who wants to be there, and Nebraska has shown. I think the girls still want to have a chance to win. And if they beat Kansas, I think they would have a chance to host probably like an Arkansas back at PBA, which would be exciting to have a chance to make it to the Final Four playing a team like an Arkansas back at PBA. So, tough task, good team, but a team that, if we play well, I think we could go down there and win.
Andy, Nebraska wins the game on Thursday night if they do what?
Yeah, they're going to have to rebound. Jackson, the 6'6" center, had 21 rebounds. Here, I think she had 19 points, 21 rebounds. They rebounded, really well from their guard spots. We had done a pretty good job rebounding all season. Missouri State, 2 games ago, out-rebounded us by 10. We have not been out-rebounded like that in a while. So, I think we'll be able to score. Kansas only plays about 5 or 6, so they will not press us, which concerns me a little bit without Hybe. If we get a matchup where teams are going to press us, Kansas has not shown a lot of full court pressure, so I think that helps. But if we continually to shoot it, we've had good balance. I think we had 3 or 4 of the last 2 games in double figures. If we keep our balance and rebound, it gives us a chance to win on the road.
Andy, you're upset potentially here. Back to the NCAAs, my friend. What's the team you maybe like to get on through to the Final Four, or at least get to an Elite Eight that maybe no one's thinking of?
Well, I was on Arkansas and UConn. I thought those two, on paper, to my eye, were talented enough to make a run. So I'm going to stay there. I still think both those teams, have the talent, have the roster, have the versatility, that can still win a lot of games. So I won't change from a couple I gave you last week. I still think both of those teams have a chance to play their way, to Houston. And, at Houston, my finals, I still think, defensively, the second game, second half, I had some doubts on them early, but that second half, I thought they were really good. So I still think Houston's going to be hard to beat, too.
I think you're right on with that. Andy Markowski with us. Andy, take care, bud. Enjoy the trip to Lawrence, and we'll get back down the road here. Thanks for a few minutes.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
He's in his 30s, but sounds like he was born with a stogie in one hand and a brew in the other.
Now, say my name.
It's Schmitty on Hail Varsity Radio.
I got the body of a taut, preteen Swedish boy.
Big thanks to Andy Markowski, Mitch Sherman so far. David Gustafson, part of Creighton Baseball, Husker Baseball, in action tonight at, Schwab, dare I say?
The Charles Schwab Field.
I got that venue correct.
And they actually have the signage correct now, I believe.
Which is important. Lawrence Lincoln, keep hammering me for that. But
happens to the best of us.
But Nebraska and Kansas Thursday. Good stuff from Andy Markowski talking hoops. Can find the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or just watch the entire video of Hail Varsity Radio. Hail Varsity YouTube channels where you go. Numbers to get in, 489-1240, 489-1240. Can email the show, Chris at hailvarsity.com. We'll get to some of those emails in just a little bit as we will dive back into some college football, specifically just the enormity of the recruiting weekend. Again, Nebraska making headlines with the list they're putting together for March 25th. The list is impressive, headlined by Mr. Raiola. Reminder to get buckled up using your seatbelt. It saves lives. It prevents injuries. Only if properly worn. Buckle up. A message from the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. So we can talk about, defining recruits, defining hires, defining moments for Nebraska football. You can lay them out there over a 50-year run that's as impressive as any in the world of college football. Nebraska trying to rekindle that. Matt Rhule trying to get that back on track with his first spring. But ESPN put together season-defining a game for their top 25 for next season. And Georgia doesn't go crazy with their schedule per se. But what really shifted things for them was what they were able to do against Tennessee, that buildup. That really springboarded them, 27-13. Ohio State, their season-defining ball game was Michigan, and it was their second consecutive loss. Michigan backed it up and proved it a year ago when they went back-to-back over Ohio State. It had been way too long, if you ask Michigan fans, since they had beaten Ohio State. Now they've done it 2 years in a row. Alabama, their opener was against Texas. They won that one, barely, but they lost to Tennessee on the road. Penn State, they've got a couple of games a year that really define them. USC, they did not pass the test anytime they played Utah last season. LSU, Oregon, you go down the list, you've got those moments. And for Nebraska football, I want to get there. As we look at the schedule, cart before the horse, way too early, but it's something to think about because we're in that definition mode. How are things defined right now by Matt Rhule? You've got to earn the right to practice and be on the practice field. Even if you're Anthony Grant. Especially if you're Anthony Grant. Moving forward, there's standards and procedures with competition that he's laid out that the guys need to meet. Guys are accepting that. They're embracing it. And they're ready to rock. I mean, the storylines are not just the defensive shift with the 3-3-5, but assessing the personnel, learning the players, and the players learning about their coaches. You've got energy and you got a certain mood. You have culture that's being fixed by Rhule, specifically in tight moments. You need confidence and execution. And you have some position groups, some guys to look at here for this upcoming spring. The quarterbacks that are healthy, Sims and Purdy and Harburg and Torres. The tight end room is uber talented with Fedoni that's getting limited action, but Gilbert, the all-world talent. Can that be part of the reality in fall? Rollins, Borkacher, Applegate, and Bonner are 2 new names in the tight end room. And then some guys that can really flash this year in spring football. What type of performance does Harburg put together? Does he get shifted to a different spot because of his athleticism? Does Gabe Irvin keep it up at the running back spot with or without an Anthony Grant in the room? Jamari Butler, is it a breakthrough year for him as a pass rusher that you want in this 3-3-5? And then you've got a guy that's a potential disruptor in Javen Wright, Buddha, with his length and athleticism. I mean, those are some puzzle pieces that you want to get into that 3-3-5. So those are all some of the storylines with spring. But with the season-defining part of things as we get into fall, do you go beyond Minnesota as the season-defining game for Nebraska if we're to really, truly look at the upcoming schedule?
Well, yeah. Yeah, I think you 100% have to look past Minnesota because that's the first game from a new head coach. There's going to be those growing pains, that learning curve, those stupid mistakes that are going to make one. Like, let me just, if you're thinking that this Nebraska team's going to look perfect in week 1, it's going to define the season, that's crazy talk. There's going to be so many issues. Just to brace yourself, Husker Nation, like there's going to be a lot of issues. There's going to be a lot of problems. There's going to be growing pains. There's going to be things that you go, what the hell are we doing on the field right now in week 1 against Minnesota, week 0, I guess, technically. But it's about, at the end of the day, getting a win in that game and learning what you need to improve upon that you can work on because you're going to learn a lot about yourself that you can go work on as you go play Colorado and Northern Illinois and Louisiana Tech. And that Colorado game just got a hell of a lot harder with Coach Prime getting added. But still, it's about learning some things about yourself in week 1. Winning and losing matters, yes, but I don't think it's going to end the season if you lose that game to Minnesota. I look ahead to some of the Big Ten West foes in the final year of the Big Ten West. I look at that stretch, particularly after Michigan, because Michigan's another tough matchup. But then you look at the 3-game stretch of Illinois, Northwestern, and Purdue. And it's hard for me to pick one game out of those 3 that's season defining, but that 3-game stretch is going to be your season definer for next year. Big Ten West foes, it follows some games where you're going to learn a lot about yourself with Minnesota and Michigan. You're going to have some time to get those things fixed with Louisiana Tech and Northern Illinois. That's the 3-game stretch where I think if that goes poorly, if you go 1-2 in that 3-game stretch, you're going to miss a bowl game next year.
Well, and listen, I think there's some grace period here for Rhule in year 1. I also think he thinks there's talent here. He's learning about it, and I think he expects to make a bowl game. I'm going to try and read his mind. I'm going to get the magic 8 ball out. But it's not about year 1. It's about year 2, year 3, and beyond with how this build goes. So you can, and typically Rhule's teams have gotten better as the year goes on, and they close, either given some other team that they have no business playing well a lot of hell on a Saturday afternoon, or they might just outright win, and then there's your springboard into year 2 where you see the jump in previous stops for Rhule in college football. I think you can get a good barometer from a organizational standpoint, from a discipline standpoint, even in game 1. It isn't going to be perfect, but how bad is bad in game 1 on the road at Minnesota? Minnesota's beatable, and maybe you don't get it done. But what's it look like? So I think that's a good appetizer for me. And if they go win it, wouldn't be surprised if it is Minnesota winning 17-10 or 24-21. Game 1, it happens. Harbaugh didn't win his first game at Michigan.
But I just can't see Minnesota going out there and dominating Nebraska.
I don't see that either.
It's a game that Nebraska, I feel like I look at it now, I look at it as a game that Minnesota's probably going to be favored by somewhere in the 4.5 point range.
So it's a field goal
and it's a game that Nebraska fans feel good about if you're in a position to win it in the fourth quarter. And you know what? Some self-inflicted mistakes happen, and that's been harped on for years with the self-inflicted mistakes and losing one-score games. But I think you'd feel a hell of a lot better about it in year 1 under Matt Rhule than you would in year 3 under Scott Frost.
What I look at as your definer, and it is the end of September. I'm going to go Michigan because they are the gold standard of your league. They are back-to-back playoff appearances, back-to-back conference champs. You have your warm-up and welcome to the Big Ten on a Thursday night. We'll be there in Minnesota. Okay, how does that go? How do you respond against Colorado? There's going to be so much hype and history, and it'll be a lot of red in Boulder. It's going to be great. The reality is, as bad as Nebraska's been, and this takeover is not easy for Rhule, it's worse for Deion.
Yep.
After they get smoked, presumably, by TCU on the road. You go beat Colorado by 3, by 30, but you figure out a way to do it in your second game. And then you've got time. Northern Illinois, not a pushover. Louisiana Tech, a pain in the neck. And then here is Michigan. By the end of September, you've got a ton of season left, but at that point in the year, you're settled, theoretically, if you're not hurt, with your quarterback, your run game, your identity. There's some strides made with your defense. And can you go play with Michigan? So it doesn't look like last year. Does it look more like 2 years ago on a night game in Memorial Stadium?
Sorry,
that's my definer. How do you stack up against Michigan after 4 games to start the season? At that point in the year, can you go get a big pelt for your wall?
I think it's a little bit funny here that it's the second day of spring practice where you're looking ahead at this season, and that's okay.
The jumping off point was here, season-defining games, right? You've got your 4 mile markers into a fall season. I hear you. We're early on.
We don't even know what the 2 deep's going to look like, but you bring up valid points here, and that's why I look at Illinois. Again, looking way too far ahead, but you realistically should be 3-2 following that Michigan game with Louisiana Tech, Northern Illinois, and Colorado. It's 3 very winnable games. 3 games Nebraska's probably going to be favored in. 4-2 after Illinois looks a hell of a lot different than 3-3 with what's coming up on the schedule.
Well, how just gracious. I'm going to whine for a minute. How gracious of the Big Ten, again, to throw you out on the road on a Thursday night and in Ireland, but it's using that brand for TV eyeballs.
But with all that being said, if you win the games you should be expected to win early in the year, you can be 3-2 headed to Illinois. If you win that, you're 4-2, and you have a chance to be bowl eligible before the end of October, going up against Northwestern and Purdue.
The kick in the you-know-where is you get Michigan, and then you have to go to Illinois.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back into it. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency. Had a blast yesterday in Columbus. Got to see Gus, a longtime partner with Hail Varsity Radio. David Gustafson back with us. He's part of the Creighton broadcast team. It is Nebraska-Creighton tonight in Omaha. Gus, we got to turn the temp up, my man. Next time I'm in Columbus for those, 8:50 start times for reserve baseball. Can you do something about that?
Well, I can't do anything about that, and I certainly can't do anything about the temperatures. But, that's the most. I love baseball, and I love watching high school baseball, but I do not like the temperatures for the high school baseball season. It's just awful. And it seems like it's that way every year, at least the first 3-4 weeks. And then, that's halfway through the year. So, yeah, last night was certainly cold here in Columbus, for sure.
Well, Nebraska and Creighton, you've seen a lot of these in-state rivalry games. Creighton comes in at 7-7. Nebraska, a good mark and a really solid offense, but a bullpen that's not quite trustworthy yet. I want your gauge on where you think this Creighton team is, right at 500, taking into account the strength of schedule they faced. Their strength of schedule, their non-conference is top 20.
Yeah, they've played some good opponents, and obviously most of it's on the road early, even for Nebraska, a lot of it's on the road early, too. But, it's tough to gauge them for a couple of reasons. One is there's been so many weather issues, whether the games have been canceled or postponed or moved location and the series is shortened. And so it's hard to look at those series, especially when they go to the weekend series, and they're only playing 2 out of the 3, because you can gauge your pitching is the biggest thing for the weekend, and you can shorten the bullpen, for instance. If you don't have to have a Sunday game, Well, that makes a difference on how you throw your Friday relievers and your Saturday relievers. So it's tough to gauge exactly where they're at just because they haven't played enough to really get a true sense of what this team is. Yeah, they're 500, but it's really difficult to figure out where they're going to end up. They'll fare well when we get to Big East play time, but at this point of the season, you kind of scratch your head at sometimes the inconsistency. But again, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they don't consistently get to play.
As you look at this Creighton baseball team right now, what would you call the strength of the team as they stay home to face Nebraska tonight?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that because, again, it's difficult. It's so early. I think, one of the strengths that's always there, and it never changes, is the fact that they're very sound defensively. That's just the way that Ed Server's coaches. So you're going to have to earn it against them usually because they don't make a ton of errors. And that's always been that way. So the biggest strength for them is always going to be their defense. They do have some good starting pitching. Again, it's early, so those pitchers aren't going deep into games. If you get into mid-April, early May, that's when we'll really see what this pitching staff can do. The offense, they got to pick it up a little bit. They have been on or completely off. They were really good at times against Wichita State over the weekend, but they were really off last week in the home opener against Kansas State. No runs, and really didn't have very many competitive at-bats. So they're a little bit more inconsistent, but again, the defense is always going to be there, and the pitching staff will get to where they want to be as well.
David Gustafson with us, Hail Varsity Radio, Nebraska-Creighton baseball preview. Let's talk about righty Dominic Cancelleri. He's on the hill, 4.91 ERA. What are the Husker hitters going to be seeing? Bryce Matthews comes in red hot.
Well, the Huskers are extremely hot. Cancelleri, he pitched in Kansas against Kansas State last Wednesday night, and he came in relief. He pitched 4 innings, and he was completely dominant. He had 9 strikeouts in those 4 innings, and he was blowing hitters by. Kansas State couldn't touch him at all. It'd be interesting to see how long, again, he goes for tonight. Creighton traditionally doesn't throw their starters more than a few innings. I wouldn't be shocked, especially with their weekend series coming up, that it was shortened to just 2 games against Minnesota, that Ed Service would let Cancelleri get to 5 innings. That would be ideal for him tonight, and then working some of those relievers. But Cancelleri's got some very good stuff, good movement, and at times he can be overpowering.
Gus, you pay a lot of attention to area baseball, not just with your Creighton duties, but also you keep an eye on Husker Baseball as a Husker affiliate, of course. And your take right now on this Will Bolt team, are you confident the offense can be or stay the identity? Do you think the bullpen and the pitching will come around? Where do you gauge this Nebraska team right now?
Well, I think the biggest concern is that bullpen. They are at times very shaky. Nebraska with just under a 5 ERA, 4.97. So that's a concern. Although tonight they'll throw Jackson Brockett. He's been very good in his last 10-plus innings. The offense, to me, is going to have to carry him as they get into the Big Ten here, which that's here this weekend already. So they'll have to carry it. Now, the thing encouraging for Husker fans has got to be the fact that they have those guys that are hitting this well, and the weather's been this poor. And it's not like they have gone, of course, he went to California, went to South Alabama, but you have played a lot of cold weather games as well. So for those 2 guys to be hitting, over 400 and that well over 400, it is impressive. And you look down the lineup, you have 7 guys total on their roster that are hitting over 300. So the offense has been very good, and I think it'll only get better because the temperatures are going to get better. And that usually leads to better hitting, and we'll see. But right now, those guys are very, very good, and I think the offense is going to carry it.
Gus, you've seen a lot of the last meetings here. Creighton's won 6 of 7. Why?
Speaking of that, it's weird to me. Nebraska and Creighton are going to play tonight for just the second time in 4 years. And I looked at that, and I said, that is crazy. But you had the COVID year. You had the year where the Big Ten didn't play non-conference opponents. And Creighton's had success of late because they've gotten some timely hitting. You look at several of those games, they're low scoring, so that usually bodes well for a defensive team like Creighton. And they've gotten some, timely hits in those meetings, plus the last two, and that goes all the way back to April of 19. Actually, the last two of the three have been at now it's Charles Schwab Field, Omaha, but it used to be T. Hunter Trade Park. So it is a little bit of a home field advantage there for Creighton as well. But, yes, 6 of the last 7, and you kind of scratch your head at times of why Nebraska hasn't been a little bit more successful. But if you look at the scores, you go back through those box scores of all those games, they're all, for the most part, extremely competitive, with the exception of the one at Haymarket Park back in 2019. So I expect fun, entertaining game tonight, and bring your blankets.
Socks, parka, skull cap, fireball. Kidding. David Gustafson.
There's alcohol there.
You can buy it in the park.
No, I know. Find a way to keep warm is Gus's advice. David Gustafson, part of the Creighton broadcast team, and dear friend of Hail Varsity for a lot of years. Gus, we'll talk again soon, bud. Thanks for a few minutes.
You betcha.
Good to spend time with David Gustafson. That's 2 days in a row. He popped by for a beverage before we said sayonara yesterday in Columbus. We'll wind down a Tuesday. It's Hail Varsity, and we're presented by Currency.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time, it's Hail Varsity Radio Tuesday edition, presented by Currency. For your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Good show today. Great stuff from Mitch Sherman on Nebraska spring football. Pro Day tomorrow, and plenty more to come with Nebraska and some of the post-practice comments. We'll get their reaction to Husker Baseball tomorrow as the Big Red in action tonight. And you have practice number 3 gets finished up around 10 tomorrow. You have offensive coordinator Marcus Satterfield and Mr. White. Yeah, the science of the 3-3-5. I'll never quit doing that because I'm a big Breaking Bad guy. But we'll have thoughts from both of those coordinators tomorrow. Thoughts from Nick Saban on if you're speeding and an Alabama player, at least speeding in a car.
1 second. I had it pulled up and it's gone away. We've reloaded. Here we have Nick Saban.
Been suspended from the team and all team activities until we gather more information about the situation and what his legal circumstance is. And, guys, everybody's got an opportunity to make choices and decisions. There's no such thing in being at the wrong place at the wrong time. You got to be responsible for who you're with, who you're around, and what you do, who you associate yourself with, and the situations that you put yourself in. So it is what it is, but there is, cause and effect when you make, choices and decisions that put you in bad situations. So.
That's an elbow, steel chair, and figure 4 leg lock to Coach Oates of Alabama basketball with the wrong place, wrong time take.
Yeah,
this is Tony Mitchell driving 141 miles per hour as he attempted to flee police in Florida last week.
And I believe he also had some sort of, was it marijuana in the car?
Yes.
I believe marijuana in the car as well. So
the ganja.
Yes. I saw it less. Well, and it is a bit of a shot at Nate Oates, but I saw it more.
It's palm and backhand.
I saw it more towards the Alabama fan base, though. That's how I read that. Is he's like, here in Alabama football, we're not going to defend this kind of behavior, and I don't think that he would go to a press conference. It's Nick Saban, actually. I shouldn't say that.
He speaks loudly through the media to the media.
Yes.
At players, at assistants, at potential prospects, at basketball coaches. He thinks it's absolute garbage what's going on with Alabama basketball. Don't kid yourself. He's competitive enough. He is probably picking against them and cheering for them to lose in his own bracket, if he does a bracket, because he still is the king dog down in Alabama. Alabama's a football school, but look at all the love Bama's gotten up until their events off the field with the basketball team. But
the big quote I heard from Nick Saban was, "There's no such thing as wrong place at the wrong time," and that has been a big thing I've seen from Alabama fans on Twitter regarding the whole situation with Miller and the Alabama basketball program. Was, oh, well, you can't punish him for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He didn't pull the trigger.
But Oates is the one who said that initially.
Yeah.
And that's why he specifically said it. Don't kid yourself. So tomorrow we'll run down Mike Babcock. We'll hear from Evan Bland and maybe a Mike Schuhart sighting. We are not far from Masters Weekend. It's a couple of weeks away, which is awesome.
I know it's officially spring based on the calendar, but spring doesn't actually start until the Masters starts.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair. Podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Download it, Hail Varsity Radio. Thanks for tuning in.